So welcome everyone to today's webinar, LMS versus LXP, what's the difference? I'm now going to hand you over to Emma and she's going to get going.
Lovely, thanks Cass. Okay, so LXP, Learning Experience Platform, that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Why now? Well, the L&D market is kind of saturated with buzzwords, and very recently the debate has been reignited around what an LXP actually is and whether that's the correct categorization for platforms like Thrive. So it's no wonder that now, kind of even 2 years into trading, one of the most common questions we're asked during the sales process is what an LXP is and how it differs to a traditional LMS, learning management system. So, there is an argument to say, it is really semantics, but I guess the key thing for us is that, we like identifying as a learning and experience platform because we feel that offers something different to a learning management system. And in this webinar, I'm going to explore what those differentiators are, what makes products like ours different. So I'm Emma Layton, the Chief Operating Officer at Thrive, and I work really closely with the customer experience team. So they're the ones who are collaborating and working in partnership with L&D teams in organisations like Moonpig, Huel, Ted Baker, Scottish Government, just to name a few, to deliver transformative LXP implementations. So we gain a lot of insight into the market, but also, how modern L&D teams are operating. So to start us off then, let's look at the learning management system, the traditional LMS. Really the clue for us is in the name. So learning management, it's about managing learning. So tracking, administering and reporting on content, which is essentially about making sure the right people have done the right training at the right time. So the real value, or at least the kind of main value, primary value, is for the manager and not the end user. That's not to say that they don't necessarily, some of them might give learners a good experience, but it's certainly not at the heart of them. And in terms of, actual technology, they haven't kind of been thought through from the perspective of the end user who's using those platforms. So this webinar isn't about saying that we don't need LMSs. We're just kind of saying that actually maybe they're not enough anymore, and exploring why that might be, and how we can look at platforms that are a little bit more user experience driven. So what do I mean by user experience driven? Well, firstly, I think there's a big point to be made here around tech. And I know it's been made before, we've been making the same point for a few years now, that, essentially tech is a huge part of people's lives. So one of the biggest drivers for learning experience platforms is to make learning technology more aligned with everyday technology experiences. And that's even more pertinent now than ever, really, because 80% of UK adults use a smartphone for most of their online services now. So, banking, shopping, admin, and then all of the apps that we use for everything from kind of like health and fitness to, shopping, luxury shopping and that sort of thing. So that's to say that 80% of the UK, and the majority of them are working age, so they're in our organisations, are used to a seamless mobile user experience when they're carrying out these tasks. So, there's a real point to be made here around making sure that tech lives up to that in terms of things like navigation, how intuitive they are to use, and essentially just the user experience, and going back to that point about having user experience at the heart of them, to make sure that they are aligned with all of our favourite apps. The second big point to focus on in terms of putting learner experience at the heart of everything is about understanding who your learners are. So in technology and kind of design generally, there's a big focus around design thinking mindset and things like user-centered design principles. Any successful app or tech company will base their technology on good user research and principles. So really, our learning technology shouldn't be any different. In the past, perhaps, there's been a tendency to think of learners as unmotivated to learn, or at best, maybe too busy. And that's the position we kind of started out from when we were looking at doing all of our research before we built our LXP. But really, that's not fair, because it completely depends on what our definition of learning is. If you ask someone what they thought of e-learning, like we did when we first started out a few years ago, what do you think of e-learning? People hark back to horrible memories of being forced to sit through every side of a 60-minute lockdown module. But if you ask them their experience of doing something that they might just do kind of mundane every day to learn or find out information, my example would be, I'm terrible when I'm watching The Crown on Netflix for trying to find out how much of the events that are being depicted are real or based on real historical events. So if you compare an e-learning module to a learning experience like that, where it's just a quick Google, you scour for a site, you find the information and you just kind of skim read it and you have the answer to your question, then really I think the answer would be that it's not the motivation or drive to learn that's the problem. And this has been reinforced just this year by the LinkedIn 2021 Workplace Learning Report. And I've pulled out some stats from that report that I think are really interesting. 83% want to learn skills to perform better in their current role. So that desire and motivation that I talked about, it is there. It's just that perhaps there's an argument to say only where content is relevant to people. Nearly as many people, 73%, want to learn about a topic that they are personally interested in. So there are some clear themes, even just from that stat, around things like engagement, personalization, but also kind of this thing that we like to talk about around broadening our view of learners as kind of holistic learners and not just workplace learners. So, people want to learn because they're curious and they're interested in things, not necessarily always because they either have to or because, it's part of their career progression, for example. What's more, Gen Z, who are well established in the workplace now, you would be quite frightened to learn if you're anything like me, watched 50% more hours of learning content last year than the year before. So even in the last year, perhaps because of the last year, even, because of what's happened, the drive to learn has increased even amongst those tech and kind of learning active kind of age groups. And then the final stat I pulled out from there was that learners who use social features, so these are things that can include Q&A, just sharing and liking content, being able to comment on it, and actual active kind of learning groups or communities, tend to watch 30 times more hours of learning content than learners who don't. So having a platform focused on managers, a learning management system, and not on the whole social learning community is not going to cut it for those learners, in our opinion. So those stats are taken from this year, but a lot of this is about the motivation for where platforms like the Lxp have come from in the first place. And I suppose the point is they were the themes, 5 years ago, and a lot of them are still prevalent and probably more prevalent now. So just to take a moment to frame what we're saying, just to kind of emphasize, we're not saying that the LMS doesn't have any value. It's just that we think it needs to evolve. Tracking completions, producing reports, these still have value for many businesses, especially heavily regulated ones. We understand that compliance is important, but it's about being able to do more than just that. And also, I guess there's a point to be made around like shaking the system up a bit. So going back to that point about the user experience, instead of serving up what we think people need, let's try and take that user-centered approach again and think about, well, what can they tell us that they need? How can we give them the freedom to kind of drive their own learning a little bit? And then what can we learn from that as L&D teams? So this is kind of where learning experience platforms came from. We've got a definition here that we've kind of tweaked throughout the years, but essentially to enable end users to discover and share content from many sources through means of a personalized and adaptive experience. So what does that look like in practice? Like, what are the specific things that we're talking about that might differentiate an LXP from a traditional learning management system? Well, firstly, LXPs are about content discovery. So I've said this kind of a few times already, but essentially, although an LXP will still, or at least a lot of them do, allow admins to push content to learners, there's much more of an emphasis on self-directed learning and learning as a habit. So really you're thinking about your kind of learning platform as more of an ecosystem where people go because they're curious, because they want to discover new things, and because they want to find out what's going on. And with this emphasis on discovery, LXPs often use machine learning concepts and algorithms to serve content up to people in a personalized way. So essentially, learning and experience platforms are based on technology that will learn from your habits and behaviors and make intelligent recommendations, for things that you'd like to see more of or people you'd like to see more of. And that's how our content feed works on the homepage of Thrive. It's based on components, but essentially those components can kind of be designed and laid out according to what admins think learners need, but essentially the content within those components is personalized. It's learning from what people have liked or interacted with before, for example. So like if you had a component that was based on what's popular right now, your specific feed would be based on people you follow or people whose content you've liked before, for example. Another thing that's at the heart of this concept of discovery is searching. So to be able to discover content, you've got to be able to find it, because we're not pushing it out in the same way. And that's, that kind of aligns with, as I say, using my Crown example, how we learn outside of work. And to make searching effective, you kind of need to rethink the concept of content entirely. So in other words, the idea of an LXP, as much as it's about technology, a lot of the technology itself is quite simple. There's kind of almost a shift in mindset that needs to happen. Essentially, content needs to be searchable, as discrete and micro as possible. If you imagine trying to search for something really specific within a 2-hour e-learning module, score module, it's really hard to do that unless you've got other tools. Whereas if you're kind of, I guess the LXP sort of popularizes bite size content and just makes it a lot more easy to kind of find what you need in the moment. It also popularizes content that's a little bit more casual. So as well as your traditional kind of e-learning and video type content, you often find on LXPs a lot more kind of articles, questions, links to external content, but also things like user generated content, so selfie videos, that sort of thing, because they all have the added benefit of making learning much easier in the flow of work. So if you think of something process oriented or task oriented, like submitting expenses or running a disciplinary meeting, it's much easier to do that if you can kind of find the content in the moment that you need it. So you can see how a sort of simple rethink of our learning technology can change the experience, not just for the learner, but for the admin as well. Because for an intelligent discovery platform like Thrive to work, you need to rethink how content is created and shared. So the process for providing learning or creating learning kind of becomes a lot less hierarchical and more collaborative. Anyone can create content and encourage, I guess the focus is on encouraging people to take any knowledge that's buried away in their heads and share it with their colleagues. And also to kind of, I guess, encourage the social learning that's already happening in your organization, and it is happening. So social learning from me turning and asking someone a question to having a chat with people over my lunch break about a design blog that I've read, that's social learning. And giving users a platform where they can engage and share that and do so in a transparent way shifts the emphasis on the L&D team from content creation and kind of being able to understand what everyone needs and deliver that at the time they need it, to a softer approach through things like campaigns and nominating learning champions, and just generally providing fun ways like competitions to kind of fill your platform up with interesting content, and also finding relevant curated content to sort of take a bit of that burden off. And then finally, one of the biggest benefits of making this social learning more visible and transparent is that L&D teams can learn from it. So I alluded to this earlier a little bit, but essentially LXPs allow managers to collect much richer data than just course completions. So you're not just ticking boxes, you're able to see a lot more about people's learning habits and behaviours. So what they're liking, what they're engaging with, what they've shared, so that you can sort of use that as a springboard to then unravel much more rich data about the intentional learning that's happening in your organisation. So those are the main differences, in our opinion, differentiators between an LMS and an LXP. I thought it would also be helpful to look at a couple of case studies, so almost understanding a little bit about why organisations make the move from a traditional learning management system to an LXP. And Sky TV are one of our clients who are a good example of this. They've seen a huge bottom line impact in moving from a traditional LMS. They're renowned for being a very agile learning and development team. They're kind of known throughout the industry for their work they've done and the kind of, the knowledge that they've shared around their agile working practices. Early in 2020, they'd kind of already acknowledged that their LMS couldn't really fully support them with that anymore. It wasn't able to help them deliver content as reactively as they would like, so to be able to respond to learners' needs quickly enough. And then this was kind of accelerated, I guess, when the pandemic hit, because as well as the agile themes, they'd acknowledged that to support people through the pandemic, they needed more than just to push out learning content. They needed a platform to keep people connected, to have a single place where people can go to seek out or provide information or updates about COVID-19. But also, they wanted to shift the focus a little bit from this kind of mandatory pushed out content to more of a self-directed approach, because during a time like this where, everyone's needs are slightly more, more pertinent, more important, things like mental health and wellbeing content and having those available for discovery on a platform is really important. Specifically with Sky, they focused on investing in their retail staff during the pandemic. So because they were unable to go into the shops to work and they didn't want to furlough them, they took the opportunity to really invest in them with training and to kind of keep them motivated, engaged whilst they weren't working, which Thrive also enabled them to do, and actually very successfully, with stats to show that last August, despite footfall being down 40%, their retail sales were aligned year on year. So that really worked out for them. And generally, they're averaging like 540,000 content views a month and a 90% engagement rate, which is obviously really impressive. Yopa Property are another client who moved from a traditional LMS. They are a more recent client, and they were using their LMS to deliver content. But what they weren't able to do was kind of unite their teams who were spread out across the country. So they had self-employed people in the UK, field-based estate agents, as well as like multiple office locations. So they needed a platform that could also help them to create a sense of community and kind of get rid of that hierarchy and encourage people to have consistent standards and knowledge share across the business. Within 2 weeks of launching, they had an 80% engagement rate across the company and over 4,000 content views. But what's most impressive about that is that that's 3,900% of an increase compared to their previous LMS, which they'd had for a few years before. Okay, so we've talked about the LXP, how it differs to an LMS. We've said that the LXP is kind of an evolution of the LMS. So I guess a question that we also get asked a lot is, what's next for the LXP? Where is the LXP going to go? And I think the biggest trend seems to be answering the question of how content can be connected to your work. So in other words, linking all the amazing content that's available on your platform to defined outcomes or career relevant goals. And this is something that our product team are really focused on at the minute and really trying to explore with a view to kind of getting some features out later in the year. When we first started out, we often compared ourselves in terms of the user experience to Netflix. So, we were kind of saying we're the Netflix of learning, because the idea of having like a carousel of content that you can kind of explore and choose cool stuff from was really appealing. Now that market's evolved and our expectations there have evolved, I think Josh Burson made this comparison, and he sort of said, Netflix is moving to more of a kind of, serving up things that we need or want. So not just having the time but we don't always have the time to kind of browse and search Netflix. We kind of expect it to recommend precisely what we need, and I think that kind of shows a little bit of a trend in where the LXP market is going as well. So kind of coming towards the end of this webinar already, it's flown by, but just to kind of close off, I guess it's really important to say that we really like the LXP label because of all the reasons we've listed and how it can differentiate us. And everything that we've developed has been done from the ground up in response to actual needs of learners and modern L&D teams. And we've adopted a user-centered approach to product development, taking insights from previous customers, competitors we've worked for, but also our current customers. We have a really good relationship with them in terms of learning what problems people have and what they want to solve with the LXP. So if you do want any more information about how Thrive can help you with any of the themes in this webinar, then please do reach out and we'd love to talk to you about it.
Amazing. Thanks for taking us through that, Em. So the LXP is here to stay.
In summary, yeah.
So we've got a few questions coming in now.
Okay.
Lots of people saying thank you. We've got 10 minutes for questions. So if everyone wants to ask their questions, Emma can go through them now. So the first question someone has literally just asked straight up, Emma, is, so an LXP can directly replace an LMS? And I think we have probably a one-word answer to that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So, all of those traditional functions around tracking, reporting, more conventional data, Thrive offers in addition to all of the social features as well. Even things like CPD, we've got support for that as well. So, yeah, essentially we can replace an LMS as well as all the other good stuff.
Awesome. And I've got someone asking here, what does the migration process look like for a current LMS if they're moving to an LXP?
Really simple, actually. So, depends on what you're trying to do. I've talked a lot in this webinar about mindset. So there is a bit of a shift, not the technology itself and this sounds like a negative thing, but it's really not. It's actually quite simple. We've designed everything to be intuitive and kind of based on simple principles. So there's a big mindset shift, but we really focus on that in our implementation process. So actually, in terms of tech setup, the only thing we really do is set your site up and do like a 1 hour, maybe 90-minute training session. The rest of that onboarding process, 12-week onboarding process, is really just about helping you to understand how a modern L&D mindset relates back to what you're trying to achieve with your teams, and trying to get people on board with how to really get the best out of Thrive and how to use it in ways that have been successful for other clients. Migration specifically, we can do all the usual stuff. So we have mechanisms, some automated, some manual, for migrating content across, and they're all provided they're within kind of normal methodologies, which we can list for you if you're interested. The migration process can be part of the scope of a normal implementation project. So yeah, we would still ask you to do a bit of a kind of closet cleanse, I think is probably the right term, in terms of just checking that everything makes sense and is valuable to pull over, but we can help you with that, and it's a very collaborative process.
Yeah, definitely. We have a great customer success team who are split out into implementation specialists who do those initial workshops with you, and customer success, who are the ones that continue the relationship on. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Loads more questions coming in now. Someone's asked, how do you see an LXP working alongside other business systems, for example, Teams, an intranet or Outlook?
That's a really interesting question. So Teams specifically, we are looking at, well, I say we're way beyond that, but we're in the latter stages of development of being able to integrate directly with Teams. So with that one specifically, yeah, fine. I think, provided everything has a kind of clear use case and there's not a conflicting kind of use case for your LXP versus some of these other systems, then you should be able to integrate them pretty well. I think, the LXP supports lots of embedded content, so like web links and that sort of thing. So for example, Thrive internally, we use a lot of Google products. So we can embed Google Sheets and Google Docs within the LXP, so that when you can actually view them within the platform where something needs to be shared amongst people. So yeah, I think as long as your use case is clear, like certainly there's no kind of conflict there.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think we see lots of clients using an LXP also as a comms tool and working with other comms tools. So Decium, for example, they do a lot of their CEO updates using our tool Broadcasts. So they use it as a comm system as well. But then also that will speak to things like Teams and also send notifications through Outlook. So all those systems kind of work together. And as Em said, as long as you kind of define your use case for what platform works for what, then yeah, they all really work well together.
Yeah, and specifically, we mentioned Teams, but we're also working on a Slack integration, and in terms of like events within Thrive, so actually setting up events, they can all be embedded within, most of the main Microsoft and Google calendars. So yeah, sorry, getting a bit specific there, but hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome. Tim's asking, regarding content, do you supply the content or just the system to package it and drive user learning?
A bit of both, really. So, we don't expect to be able to provide all of the content you need. We don't do anything bespoke, for example. But our system, so Thrive LXP, is integrated with auto curation content from Anders Pink and Get Abstract. So Anders Pink is you can kind of set up briefings to pull in web content like articles, blogs, that sort of thing, that relevant to specific subject areas. And Get Abstract is essentially abstracts of books. So I guess like summaries of big, kind of industry and industry specific and just generally kind of business focused books. We also have, so the other arm of our business is off-the-shelf content. And as a Thrive LXP customer, you'll get access to all 170 resources within that micro-learning catalogue as well. So we can help you to either upload all the content or to essentially make it into specific pathways for your learning audiences. Yeah, so a bit of both, really.
Awesome. And Chris is asking, users will typically want to source learning from multiple places. So this leads on nicely to what you were just talking about Get Abstract, so LinkedIn Learning, as well as their own internal learning, but without having to search through different websites. Do you integrate with external learning providers within your library? Which I think you can.
Yeah, so I mentioned Get Abstract and Anders Pink. We also have an integration with LinkedIn Learning. So if you're a LinkedIn Learning customer, then already, then you can basically integrate your account with our platform. What was the other part of that question? Sorry, I've lost my thread there.
No worries. Just talking about auto creation and
okay, yeah, different websites. Libraries. Sorry, I'm just looking back at what Chris said. Yeah, different websites. So the point about different websites, I guess, we like I said, all content types, like external content types, like web-based content, can be embedded within the platform. But also we have our browser extension, which is a new feature on the Thrive platform, which essentially allows you, when you're logged into Thrive and browsing the internet, if you do find any content that's useful, to kind of cross-reference if it's already in the platform, and if it's not, to be able to seamlessly kind of add that to the platform. So yeah, we do really support the idea of just embedding content from anywhere and kind of integrating it with your platform.
Fabulous, thank you. Interesting question here from Simon. Simon's asking, what non-traditional LMS feeds does an LXP use? So he's used Google as an example, and potentially Facebook and Twitter. What range of social media resources are usable?
I'm not sure I understand that question, Cassie. How did you interpret that one?
So I think I've interpreted that one. So how our content posts within the frame of an LXP. So for example, Google works really well, and we use Google Sheets, we use Google Docs, and that feed comes straight through to the LXP. We haven't actually had any clients use social media, I don't know if you're aware of any.
No, I've not seen social media. The closest thing I've seen is embedding things like Spotify. So to be able to create collaborative playlists in Spotify directly in Thrive. That's probably the most kind of social media-y one that I've seen.
Yeah, but essentially, yes, it is possible for non-traditional feeds to pull through. I'm just giving a great example there of Spotify, which is actually used in Sumo Digital, one of our clients who are a games developer, and Brookson as well. So yeah, that is already being used. But interested to hear about how we could potentially use more social media. Maybe we'll talk to our clients about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. An easy one here from Rob: is e-learning SCORM and XAPI compliant?
Yes, our microlearning catalog is, yes.
Fabulous.
And in terms of what the platform supports, that's correct. Yes, it will support all the standard method, all the standard kind of industry terms, I guess.
Yeah. And a question here. I have nothing, just a spreadsheet, crying face. How quickly can Thrive become a reality in a workplace?
Do you know what? That is the best place to start, because actually one of the hardest things is going from, you know, a lot of organizations have a lot of different tech, a lot of learning resources, and actually they have the opposite problem of kind of being a bit overwhelmed with stuff and not knowing what's relevant. So I would say, like, starting from nothing is kind of the best place to be, really, because you can kind of start with a completely fresh approach and really think about what's important for your teams, and kind of through the collaborative kind of processes that we talked about as part of our customer experiences teams onboarding, we can really help you to kind of start thinking about things with a really fresh perspective. So I think that's a great place to be in, actually.
And then the next question here from Andy, going back to the reporting question: are the LMS type reports downloadable and out of the box, or configurable to Thrive?
So it's hard to say without talking specifics here, but most of the ones that we've found to be conventional in learning management systems are downloadable. We are working on the development feature at the minute to allow you to configure reports around specific configurations within your system. But at the minute, yeah, they are quite sort of out of the box, because it is a SaaS product.
Cool. Hopefully that answers your question, Andy. And I think we've got time for one more, because I'm aware that we're 3 minutes over our promised timekeeping. Rob's asking, how easy is it to set up for multi-organisations? For example, their main staff group is PCC staff, but then we also have users from NHS, other local authorities, volunteers, and other partners.
This is a really interesting question, actually. I'd probably quite like to speak to Rob, because it's something that our product development team are working on at the minute, because we've had a lot of kind of public sector clients who've brought this challenge to us, and we have managed to sort of work around it, but we don't have an almost default way of doing it. So it is a challenge that we're trying to solve. Certainly, if we know this from the outset, we can make it work. So by setting up, for example, connected multiple sites. But yeah, I'd actually quite like to speak to you about that. Maybe we should reach out afterwards and have a chat.
Awesome. And just on that, if you want to email Emma, it's emma.layton@thrivelearning.com. I feel like an advert for you, Emma. Cool. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there, just because I'm aware we're 4 minutes over, and we promised that we'll keep this webinar short and sweet. So thank you everyone for tuning in today, and thank you, Emma, for taking us through a really helpful session and up that old age question of what are the differences between an LMS and an LXP. The recording for you all will be available in the next few days. We'll also be sending you out the slides. So if there are a few of you asked for a copy of the slides, so we'll be sending those out to you. Thrive's next webinar will be at the same time next Wednesday, where Emma will be joining us again to discuss why 2021 is the year for social learning. She's going to be sharing tips and tricks on getting started with user-generated content and how tech can enable a social learning culture. So in the meantime, if you have any more questions, our details are up on the screen there. But otherwise, we will see you all next week for our next half an hour modern L&D mindset session.